This is Land of Havilah, Ecclesiastes 3. The first 8 verses are well known. Verse 1. For everything there's a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Comment in verse 1, the theme of the passage is obvious that there's a time for every purpose under heaven. The passage begs the question, why does God reserve a time for any objectionable event, any negative thing? Why is any time the right time to die, kill, weep, tear apart, and wage war, for example? It's perplexing when God allows suffering. The answer, if you care to receive it, is in a related verse from the New Testament that says, all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose, Romans 8:28. So even though there are a lot of objectionable things on the list Solomon just gave, and we could add more from our own list, for believers, God will amazingly redeem all those situations for good. So that's the answer to the blaring question of the passage, why all the negative events? The first answer is that God always has good in mind for us, even when things don't look good. And secondly, negative events call for faith, without which it's impossible to please God, Hebrews 11:6. God understands it can be the struggle of our lives for us to keep faith in response to those events, but that's the purpose of our lives, to keep faith in response to those events. It's even possible to sail through those situations with joy and confidence through faith. Now on another subject, verse 9. What profit has he who works in that which he labors? I've seen the burden which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. He's made everything beautiful in its time. He's also set eternity in their hearts, yet so that man can't find out the work that God has done from the beginning even to the end. I know that there's nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good as long as they live. Also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy good in all his labor is the gift of God. I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. And God has done it that men should fear before him. That which is has been long ago, and that which is to be has been long ago, and God seeks again that which is passed away. Comment, the passage we just read is a stream of consciousness that ends in a remarkable place, which ties the passage together in the last verse of it. Solomon wants to know in verses 9 and 10 the purpose of all this hard work. Why did God sentence man to so much labor on the earth? In verses 11 to 13, life's not all labor. There are some offsets. There's beauty in so many things, the wonder of eternity that God has placed in our hearts, and the mystery of God's purposes. Those things give us a lift. And there's rejoicing to be had, and the lift we get from doing good. There's eating and drinking, and even in labor there's enjoyment. Also in verses 11 to 13, we know God has purposes in all of it, but those purposes are a mystery. Mysterious things happened in eternity past which still affect us today, and likewise, who knows what God has planned for eternity future, where he's going with all this. Therefore, we don't know how to interpret the mysteries of the present. You don't know what to think of a story until the end of it. But God has his purposes, and in verses 14 and 15, he'll establish those purposes in his own providence. Then verse 15 hints at the resolution to all this. It's a hint of God's eternal purpose, which is that in the future, God will reestablish that which was long ago. To fill in the details more, we know from Revelation that in the future God will reestablish Eden, so to speak. He'll reestablish the perfection of the world as it was in Eden, without tears, death, mourning, crying, pain, or any negative event, Revelation 21:4. quoting Solomon from verse 15 again as a reference to the perfection of Eden and to the Eden-like state that God will reestablish, quote, "That which is to be has been long ago, and God seeks again that which is passed away," end quote. God seeks again for Eden, which was long ago. In the meantime, while we're in this long interval we call our own life in verses 11 and 12, with all its objectionable labor and its objectionable events such as war and so on, there's nothing better to do than enjoy the things God's given to do good and to keep the hope of eternity in our hearts. Now, for another vicissitude of the present life which will be resolved in eternity future, there's the issue of wickedness, verse 16. "Moreover, I saw under the sun in the place of justice that wickedness was there, and in the place of righteousness that wickedness was there. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every purpose and for every work." Comment in verses 16 and 17, Solomon observed wickedness in the present life and figured there'd have to be a resolution to wickedness in the form of a judgment. Now for some more questions coming up to which we're to provide the answers, verse 18. "I said in my heart, as for the sons of men, God tests them so that they may see that they themselves are like animals. For that which happens to the sons of men happens to animals. Even one thing happens to them. As the one dies, so the other dies. Yes, they all have one breath, and man has no advantage over the animals, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all turn to dust again. Who knows the spirit of man, whether it goes upward, and the spirit of the animals, whether it goes downward to the earth? Therefore I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his works, for that's his portion. For who can bring him to see what will be after him?" Comment in verses 18 to 20. "By simple observation on this earth, it seems there's no essential difference between man and animal. From what we can tell, they both live, breathe, and return to dust. Therefore, in verse 21, since they seem the same, who knows whether there's a difference between them in the afterward, whether the spirits of men go upward and the spirits of the animals go downward? If we can't say there's an afterlife in verse 22, we better enjoy life now, for who can bring a man to see what comes after him?" The answer to those questions begins in Genesis 1, that God made man in his image. That wasn't said of the animals. Furthermore, men have the power to become children of God, Matthew 5:9, Romans 8:14, 1 John 3:2, and many other places. So there's a critical distinction between man and the animals. And as to the question in verse 21, where do their spirits go? Subsequent prophets answered very clearly in Daniel 12:2, for example, that, quote, "Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt," Daniel 12:2. Jesus told the thief on the cross, "Today you'll be with me in paradise," Luke 23:43. And there's the multitude of statements in the Scripture about that. And as to where the spirits of the animals go, that's still a mystery. We do know riders come out of heaven on horses in Revelation 19, and there are creatures in heaven, Revelation 5:13, for example, but whether the spirits of the animals on earth rise, the Scripture's silent. One preacher gave the answer that if you need your pet to be happy in heaven, your pet will be there. And as for the question in the last verse, who can bring a man to see what will be after him? The answer to that is Jesus. When Thomas asked the way to heaven, Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me," John 14:6. And Jesus said he would, quote, "Come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also," John 14:3. Ecclesiastes 4 is next.